If you run a small recruitment agency, you don't have time to manually sift hundreds of CVs. Smart Sifty does it for you. It screens, shortlists, and ranks candidates instantly, fairly, and consistently, so you can focus on actually placing people, not drowning in admin. Less bias, less time wasted, more placements. If you're serious about running a smarter, more efficient agency, go to smartsifty.com and book a demo today.
What great ideas are so close within your grasp? Seeing other points of view, anticipating change, considering multiple possible turnouts, acknowledging uncertainty, searching for compromise. We're going to talk about how to get over those limiters of innovation so that you can extract better thinking from yourself and your team. So let's talk about how to win the future.
This week's guest is Theo Smith, one of the leading voices on neurodiversity, inclusion, and workplace design. With more than 17 years' experience across recruitment, talent acquisition, recruitment marketing, and HR tech, Theo has spent years challenging the way organizations attract, assess, and support talent. In this episode, we discuss why so many hiring processes unintentionally exclude great people, whether concepts like cultural fit are doing more harm than good, and how organizations can create workplaces that work better for everyone. We also explore AI, neurodiversity, and why the future of hiring might look a little bit different. Welcome back, everybody, to the Marketing Rules podcast. It's my pleasure to welcome on board Theo Smith. Theo, I've wanted you on for a while. I've been following a lot of your kind of content on LinkedIn and on kind of socials. But for anyone else out there who isn't aware of kind of what you do, even though I know you're a kind of top voice on LinkedIn, so I'm sure lots of people do know who you are. But for those who don't, or don't know a little bit about your background and what exactly you do, maybe you could kind of fill us in on your extensive background.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on. So 17 plus years in recruitment marketing, in recruitment process outsourcing, in heading up recruitment for organizations directly, and in working in HR tech, and more recently in the last 6 years, specializing in neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. So I've written books about it, neurodiversity at work, upside down, inside out, there we go. And I've recently written another book, Design for Humans, and I talk on my podcast periodically and advise organizations, but do a lot of work around keynote speeches now on the topic of neurodiversity in the workplace.
Yeah. On the kind of writing of the books, we've had several authors on here before. What was that process like? Was that always an idea that, you know, there's a couple of books in me that I feel that I can get out? Was that an easy process? What was that like? I'm just interested. Yeah.
No, it wasn't in me. I never thought I would ever write a book. I struggle to write with a pen. I get cramps. I don't hold a pen properly. I'm dyslexic, ADHD, and autistic, which provides me all kinds of problems writing and focusing on what I'm writing. However, I had started to write quite a lot of bits of content, blogs, content on LinkedIn. And so I got used to like explaining my thoughts in short form content. And then somebody said to me, Theo, you should write the book on neurodiversity. And it was Katrina Collier. And she'd written a book with Kogan Page. And she said, I'll intro you. And before I knew it, I'd spoken to them, they'd agreed, and I panicked. So I thought, well, if I'm going to write a book, I need to go and find somebody who understands how to write books. And I found Professor Amanda Kirby, who'd already written at that point about 7 books. She was an academic, researcher, general practitioner by trade. I thought, that is my co-author right there. What I didn't bank on is that she still shares some similar challenges as me, even though she's done all of those things. So we were an interesting couple together, like not doing the stuff that we should be doing in terms of writing a book. So a lot of it came from recording content like this, extracting the really interesting bits of that content and then getting it down into the book and then writing things around it. So I used my expertise of writing short bits of content to just build on that layer upon layer upon layer until we had like 110,000 word book.
Amazing. Obviously, at the end, we can kind of go into that a little bit more. And I know one thing I've kind of wanted to kind of kick things off with, and I know some of this is covered in the book. So, is you talk a lot around the kind of the workplaces and the hiring process just aren't really designed kind of for real people. I know this is kind of a reoccurring theme that comes up a lot in your kind of content online, a little bit in the books. Where did that come from? Where did this idea come from? Is it from experience? Is it from talking to so many people? Where did that idea kind of come from originally?
Yeah, so I've worked with so many different organizations. So that experience of working with organizations through all the different aspects of what I've done. And because I've worked in 360 recruitment at the very beginning, because I've worked in executive search, because I've done the recruitment marketing, the employer branding, I've managed social media teams, managing social media content. And so the variety is pretty large. And so I've seen recruitment at all these different stages. And I've seen that in reality, the way that we create content, the way that we build our systems and our processes, or the systems and processes that we acquire often have huge gaps, and they still do. And the problem, there was a point where I wanted to look at assessment as an example, because organizations tend to go out and they buy an assessment tool because they have problems with volume recruitment, let's say graduates, and they've got like tens of thousands of applicants. So they want to streamline that. So they buy an assessment tool, and that assessment tool is going to help them with the volume, right? Get that volume down. But what it doesn't often help you with is those people who were struggling to get through in the first place. You turn that dial up, right? And you turn that dial up so more people who were struggling to get in can't get in, just by nature of that single tool that you select. And what I would love to see, but we're not there at all, is the candidates that are more empowered to have some selection around what it is. So that we democratize some of those choices that are made by organizations, and that they could be made by candidates. So that a candidate could go, well, I know assessment technology often locks me out. So can I pick one that I know is more likely to have been built with neurodiversity or neuroinclusion or disability or whatever it may be in mind? Or can I pick a completely different path and I'm able to demonstrate or explain that path, or pick something else that enables me to show my skills and my ability? That we don't have that often. Some organizations will build it and say, here's your route around. But in the majority of cases, where recruitment functions are too busy, recruiters are too busy, and they just want to get the right candidate in as quickly as possible, because that seems the best thing to do in terms of managing their workload. So take that experience and then look at every facet and aspect of that life cycle of recruitment. And I guarantee you that is happening not just in assessment, but it's happening at every little subsection of that recruitment assessment process. And by the way, I feel like now is the opportunity that we can start to rectify some of those problems. Maybe not now, today, because recruitment functions are really struggling. But definitely as we start to get our heads around AI, technology innovation, the bridges that we can build between these different technologies, and the gaps that we can fill, I think there may be some opportunities, if not solve this as a complete problem, to rectify it where it's having the most detrimental negative impact on those candidates who struggle to get through.
So if I was to potentially play devil's advocate in that scenario, I mean, being able to put in place different potential avenues and journeys and routes through the application process sounds like something that possibly is only really available to bigger organizations. But smaller organizations may think that sounds actually quite an expensive process to put in place. And I'm sure you get this kind of this. Sure, you've had this question on numerous occasions. So, is this something that bigger businesses, it's they can afford it and it's a nice to have, but for the smaller businesses, is there a pushback there? Is there a way that they can handle this without it maybe with and getting over that feeling that it sounds quite expensive?
I don't think it needs to be. So I actually think it's potentially the other way around, which is the really large scale organizations with the huge elements of volume and all the other impacting factors, and the reality that organizations are reducing workforces currently for a number of factors. I think for the bigger organizations, actually, this is becoming more difficult to do at that scale than smaller organizations who can actually go, well, in fact, we can put some of our own levers and mechanisms in place to provide an alternative optional solution. And some of that maybe we build as our own independent piece of technology or innovation, and maybe sometimes it is as simple as going at this point where somebody hits our applicant tracking system or our CRM or whatever it is. At the point they hit that, we're able now to identify that we're losing some people, and we have been for a long time at that point, because there's too much content, there's too much fear around what's on the other side of it, and we've not been clear about it, or we've been too specific in terms of our needs and requirements, and that's locked so many people out. So at this point, what if we just handheld people? We just gave people an option to come around, circumvent it, and we just saw what those numbers look like. And what organizations realize is the numbers are not as big as they think they might be, because not everybody who faces barriers is going to need help at that point. So the point of applying onto the ATS will be a barrier to some, but not all. Some people will be in a point of where they feel fairly confident in terms of their abilities, their career trajectory. They may be a bit earlier on, they may have a bit of experience. For them, they may have some of those barriers, but at the minute, they're not going to present at that moment. So what we tend to find is it's a much smaller cohort group of people that may need that differentiated support. And that differentiated support often isn't as costly as we think. And we know that because government data shows that access to work costs per person under £100. They're not as much as we would expect. We fear the big changes like putting in a lift, but in reality, most of them are really small adaptations. And with the advent of AI and becoming much more accessible, some of these tools, technologies, bots, whatever, just to solve that little problem here, we potentially could build and test and trial out ourselves.
You mentioned a couple of times losing people in the process, right? So, at what point in the recruitment process do you think the people are being lost? You know, I mean, or what stages does that often kind of happen at? Right? Where do you see that kind of happening?
So it's every single part of the stage. We will leak candidates that should be getting through for one reason or another. But the very beginning of that, the content that we produce is still problematic. Even though AI is used predominantly in terms of recruitment in the creation or changes to job adverts, I think that's one of the biggest areas currently where AI is being used, but still not as successfully, because we are still creating content that is exclusionary by design, by nature of some of the terminology, some of what we're asking for, by nature of society, what's going on in the world, but also because organizations take the quickest approach to reducing the number of applicants. So again, I'm still seeing, especially in the public sector, lots of organizations that have 6 months probationary period for roles. I can't understand why they can't assess their ability to deliver that role within weeks, not 6 months. And so that's a very simple example. And often that's bureaucracy, right? So some of those things are hard to change. So they add in these layers of barriers that are exclusionary, like you must be able to work in a fast-paced environment with no real description of what fast-paced actually looks like. And for anybody who has struggled within an organization because there has been an expectation to work at pace, but not based on what you deliver, based on people expect you to look busy. And therefore, for a candidate seeing fast paced, they're just thinking, well, I've worked in those environments and people weren't interested in the quality of the work I was able to deliver. They were interested in how visible I was at 7:00 in the evening and how quickly I responded via email. That is a different focus to fast paced. That may not be what the organization means, but that is the perception of many candidates coming through. And from that perspective, from that single term that they've put in, they're already turning off candidates who possibly have high intellect, but don't like to be put under that significant pressure of speed because they value the quality of work. So what an organization is saying, well, we're valuing decreasing quality of work over speed in response. And so there are so many elements to the very early stage of how we design content, what we ask for, how we present that to the outside world that we're not recognizing. And one of the big potential missed opportunities from organizations, from recruitment functions, teams, businesses at the minute is that now we've got the next generation of talent probably using AI disproportionately to how we used Google. So they're now going in and going, I want to work for a company. I want it to be a tech company. I want it to be within the Manchester area. I want it to cover off these things. And I want it to be inclusive, right? Because I am autistic and ADHD, or I have a child, or my sexual preferences are, or whatever. I don't know, whatever it is that they want to share to ensure that they identify those organizations so that they're not wasting their time. And, we may put some of this into Google. We may have put this in other places. We may not have shared some of those personal things, or we may go onto private mode, whatever. But we don't really know to the extent of how candidates are using this. But as from an organizational perspective, are we thinking about that in terms of how we present information? And rather than how that is going to show up on Google search, how is that going to show up on AI? And I think if organizations are not thinking about that in terms of the language they use in adverts and everything else, AI is going to read that far more quickly and start to identify, well, that company is always saying they're fast paced. And it also says these other markers, which based on the gazillions of other data points that I'm able to access, I'm going to make an assumption that this organization is fairly toxic. They make you work long hours. And therefore, anybody who puts it into the AI going, I really don't want to work in that environment, that organization is not going to come up. And again, this is like the future lens. I don't know to the extent that this is going to impact on applications. At the moment, applications are really high. So organizations can probably not worry about this. I reckon those smaller, more agile organizations that get ahead of this and really start to think about how their information and content, especially around careers, employer branding, marketing, is playing into how people are now searching in AI is going to have a massive impact on the talent they're able to attract, especially if they consider it with the inclusion lens.
Thinking Circles is your fractional marketing department, purpose-built for the recruitment industry with deep sector experience. We consult with recruitment agencies, talent teams, and HR and RegTech companies to deliver strategic marketing leadership with tangible results. Our proven approach enables you to attract top talent, drive client growth, and build standout employer brands. As a flexible extension of your team, we offer the insight and support you need to make smarter marketing decisions without the cost or complexity of hiring in-house. One of the points you made is around kind of terminology, and one of the terms that you've kind of skipped around a little bit around, you just talked about is cultural fit, right? It's one of these terms that I think is pretty abstract at the best of times. But do you think is cultural fit one of those kind of terms that you think businesses are using basically to kind of hire the same people over and over again because they can note it down to it's the company culture, it's cultural fit?
Fundamentally, hiring managers broadly lack the training, the support to make the right decisions. And that's what it comes down to. So when you leave them with limited resource, tools, or expertise to make decisions, they are more likely to lean on questionable decisions. And culture fit is a prime example of that. I would argue that in the majority, when someone uses culture fit, they've run out of reasons to give on why that candidate is not the right candidate. And therefore, culture is the thing that nobody can explain. It's the magic or whatever, or the toxicity that you can't truly explain or dissect properly. And therefore, how can you argue with somebody on a basis of something that can't be explained? And so I would say that that's where it's born from. We know that research that's come out this year from City and Guilds, the Neurodiversity Index report, shows something like 2/3 of employees around neurodiversity and neuroinclusion identify managers as kind of the point of failure in terms of their ability to succeed in jobs. There's so much data around this. Beyond that, the individuals tend to fail and struggle because of a lack of support or understanding from management. So why do we think that changes at the point of interview and assessment when some managers might do it once a year or once a lifetime? And even if they do it more, they might still be doing it badly all the time. And so I would say that's where culture is problematic. And it's born out of things that used to get me excited, because the idea of, culture, of being together as a team, and neurodiversity is like that, like, yes, we're ADHD, or yes, we're autistic, or yes, in reality, we're human, we're complex, we're many things. And we very rarely fit neatly into one thing. I am Welsh. I was born in Wales. I'm proud to be Welsh. In actual fact, I've got about 8% Welsh blood in me. The majority of my blood is Irish. I've got some Danish, a little bit of Scottish, and some English. And so in reality, my cultural identity is not what I thought it was. And I think that's the reality of the situation within the workplace that we don't uncover enough of, that we're far too complex to fit into this box of culture as an organization, because it's fluid, it's changing. And with everything that's happening in the world, it is now changing at hyperspeed. So how can we identify it as a specific characteristic that we can assess on as part of our recruitment process?
I want to touch on neurodiversity a little bit. Obviously, you talk a lot about this. You've written books on this. Where do you think we sit with understanding neurodiversity as within business at the minute? Is it getting better? Is it generally improving? Is it just lip service? Is it where we were with terms like inclusion and diversity a couple of years ago, when everybody was talking about it, and then it's kind of dropped off the radar? What's the kind of snapshot of neurodiversity within companies as of today?
Oh, wow. And so if I think about what's going on in the world, and I think about Black Lives Matter as an example, and the massive shift to do some positive action from organizations, and how all of a sudden in a few years that goes beyond falling off a cliff, it almost goes in the opposite direction in terms of the negativity that surrounds it for a wide variety of reasons. And I fear, that any topic of this type that really challenges the status quo, that challenges what has been defined as acceptable and normal. And we can look at the experience of women in the workplace as an example. I mean, there's so many examples of where we've mistreated people. And then where we try now to find an excuse to go back into the dark ages. So I would say where neurodiversity is at today is many organizations have a better understanding on a base level. Many people have stood up and started talking about the topic. So that's increased awareness. We know that across social media, TikTok as an example, went off the chart about 3 years ago. It doubled, billions and billions and billions of views of the hashtag ADHD. Now, some of that content was rubbish and misleading, but some of that content, maybe even some of the rubbish content, got families talking about the topic around the dinner table, and that changed lives, absolutely, without a doubt. So, for me, when you bring a topic from being something that is on the sidelines that people don't understand, that people don't talk about, to the main frame of conversation, it does something. And it's not all good, but it definitely brings the topic to the table. And where that is now going to go, I can't tell you, because we've got other factors, globalization, the breakdown of some societies, wars, AI, all of these things will affect on the direction of neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. And what I'm pleased about is that the conversation is being had in many spaces and places that it wasn't being had before. And if we have these conversations, we're much more likely to resolve or find solutions to some of these problems. And we're much more likely to live in a world where we normalize some of these topics, where absolutely 10 years ago, like it was a different world in reality.
Yeah.
And it still is in many spaces and places on the planet. So, I focus from the perspective of, I want to ensure that we do as much as we can for the next generation, my children, so that when they walk into the workplace, when their kids walk into the school environment, they will see a different world. How different, I don't know, but all my energy and focus is on that, because I can't see today changing enough that I'm going to be happy and content that we've done enough. So I have to think about the impact on the next generation, because that's the thing that gives me the momentum and drive to keep on going.
You know what? I think that's a great place to try and wrap things up. But before I let you go, tell us a little bit more about the books. Where can we get them? Where are they available, etc.?
Yeah, so Neurodiversity at Work, it won Business Book of the Year award. It was recognised as top 3 European learning books of impact. And it was written about 6 years ago. We're looking at maybe updating the content now, but it's still very relevant. First of its type. It was to challenge the status quo in organisations, because I was speaking to a lot of people and the conversation was fragmented. There were people over here, there were people over there, and they were all having these conversations, but it wasn't interconnected in terms of the workplace. And so Amanda and I wanted to write the kind of the book that could direct that conversation. And since then, boom, it's exploded. So there's so many more books on the topic, all different variety of elements of the workplace. People writing about ADHD and finance, and so it really has grown significantly. But you can still get that book all over the world, Amazon, in any good bookstore, Waterstones, and it is the kind of the go-to book on the life cycle, the employee life cycle, I guess, of neurodiversity in work. Design for Humans, I wrote recently, that came out early this year. That was because I recognized that since the book, I wanted to think about a lot of the problems were still focused around people. And it was like, the person is the issue. We need to rectify the person, get the person out, they're problematic. And I wanted to reframe it as, actually, a lot of the problems that we have are design problems, designs with the system, the processes, and we can change them. And if we look at what we thought were people problems and rethink them as design problems, rather than at the point of AI getting embedded within our organizations, accelerating negative aspects of the way that we work, we have an opportunity to design them in a positive way that reframes it as AI that can support individuals by rethinking the systems and processes that they work within. So it was to challenge the status quo from that perspective, to give another lens to what the workplace can look like and inclusion can look like within an organization. And finally, I've got a third book that's coming out with Hatchet, Jessica Kingsley, and that comes out early next year with Amanda and myself, specifically to help parents. It's the survival guide for parents of ND kids. And that's because one of the biggest areas that I recognize people struggle across organizations, from everyone I speak to, from CEOs to founders of tech companies, of recruitment companies, it's the parental aspect is one of the biggest barriers. So I thought the workplace was the one to do, and we've done it. But actually, one of the biggest topics that keeps coming up in workplaces all the time is I really struggle to advocate for my child and still be able to deliver the work that I do. And that's one of the biggest conflicting challenges that I have. So Amanda and I wanted to look at that as a challenge.
Brilliant. Amazing. Well, we all look forward to that coming out next year. We'll obviously include all the details to yourself and links to the books in the show notes. So if anybody wants to know more about you, reach out, connect, or order one of the books on a very popular online kind of buying and shopping e-business kind of site, they can. But Theo, for now, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. We look to having you on again soon.
Brilliant. Thanks for having me on. Great to see you.
Thanks for listening. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the Marketing Rules podcast on Apple, Spotify, and all other major podcasting platforms. I've been your host, James Whitelock, and I hope you can join me and more amazing guests next time. The Marketing Rules podcast is a Think in Circles production.